On New Year's Eve, my millionaire son hugged me and asked, "Enjoying the $7,000 monthly allowance, Mom?" I felt sick and replied, "Son, I'm barely making rent." That's when my greedy daughter in law choked on her food. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you're here to listen. Stay here with me through this whole story and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far my stories travel. I was too stunned to say anything else. I just stood there, in the middle of their designer living room, holding a paper thin champagne flute like it might steady me. The party noise blurred, fading behind the whoosh of blood in my ears. Fireworks sparkled outside the wall length windows, but all I could see was my son's face, smiling like he'd just paid off my worries with a wave of his wallet. My knees locked to keep me from sitting down on the spot. We were surrounded by people I didn't know, his coworkers, his clients, people in dresses that cost more than my car, and yet Ryan had said it loudly, like it was a joke. Like the whole world knew he was the generous, golden-hearted son who took care of his aging mother. But I wasn't being taken care of, I was being buried. Beneath bills, beneath exhaustion, beneath the shame of waking up at 5 every morning to clean other people's offices before clocking in for my shift at the grocery store. I was 66 years old and couldn't afford to slow down. And now I was supposed to believe my son thought I was living it up on 7 grand a month? Ryan was still grinning at me, glass raised like a toast. "You've earned it, Mom. You gave up everything for me. You deserve comfort." Comfort. I hadn't bought a new winter coat in 8 years. I washed my hair with dish soap last month when the shampoo ran out and I couldn't justify spending 4 francs. The pain in my hips never eased anymore, not even when I lay flat in bed. And every time I called the pharmacy to refill my arthritis prescription, I had to choose between pain relief and groceries. "What comfort?" I whispered. "Ryan, I'm not receiving anything." He frowned, lowered his drink. "What do you mean?" "I never got that money. Any of it." He blinked. I saw it land in his mind, not fully, but just enough to knock the air out of his illusion. He turned, like he could call for answers, and that's when the coughing started. Behind him, his wife, Vera, clutched her throat. She wasn't choking on food, she was choking on fear. Her champagne glass shattered on the floor. Someone gasped. A woman nearby rushed to her side, asking if she needed a doctor. But I wasn't watching the scene unfold, I was locked onto her eyes. Her perfectly lined, champagne sparkling eyes that were now wide with the realization that the curtain had dropped, and I'd seen everything. Ryan turned back to me, his voice tight. "Mom, what do you mean you haven't been getting it? I've been sending you that allowance every month automatically." I barely heard him. Vera was still coughing loud, dry, racking coughs. Her manicured hand flew to her chest as she staggered back against the edge of their marble kitchen island. The same island I'd polished with admiration when they first bought the house, thinking how proud Robert would have been of the life Ryan built. Now all I could see was the look on Vera's face, like someone who'd been pushed off a cliff and had just realized the fall was real. "Where have you been sending the money?" I asked. "To your account, the one Vera set up. She said you wanted help managing it." I looked from him to her. "What account?" Ryan looked helpless. "She said you were too proud to talk about needing support, that you were embarrassed." "She said that?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "She told me not to bring it up directly with you," he said, glancing down at his drink like it might explain things. "That it made you uncomfortable. But I've been sending it every month." 7,000. The number rang like a bell in my chest. That was more than I made in 3 months. While I skipped dinners, wore holy socks, and borrowed library DVDs for entertainment, someone had been siphoning $7,000 in my name. For 3 years, 36 months, $250,000. Guests were starting to notice. A man in a sharp tuxedo leaned toward Vera. "Should we call an ambulance?" Vera shook her head too quickly, still clutching her chest like the threat of medical attention would make things worse. She coughed once more, then stopped, not because she'd recovered, but because she realized it was pointless. The damage was done. Her secret was out. I saw it in her eyes. Not just panic, not just guilt, but calculation. A desperate search for a way to spin the moment, to reframe the truth, to make herself the victim. I'd seen that look before, in younger versions of women like her, beautiful, composed, always two lies ahead of everyone else. But right now, Vera had no script. And I, standing in my secondhand shoes, in the same navy dress I'd worn to funerals and job interviews, had something I hadn't felt in years. Leverage. Ryan moved beside her, his voice low. Are you okay? She nodded mutely, her face ghost pale beneath the glittering party lights. She wouldn't look at me, wouldn't meet my eyes. Mom, Ryan said, his voice brittle. I swear I thought you were getting the money. I don't understand. I believe you, I said, though my words tasted like ash. But I think we both understand who does. Silence spread like smoke. A few guests hovered near the door, sensing something wasn't right, but unsure whether to ask. Somewhere, music still played from the house, speakers cheerful and soft, the kind of tune meant for toasts and dancing. It sounded grotesque now. Ryan stared at his wife, as if seeing her for the first time. She reached out to him, but he didn't move. I think, I said, gently setting my glass down on their $1,000 countertop, this party is over. Then I turned and walked away, not because I was angry, but because I suddenly realized I wasn't the one who should feel ashamed. When I stepped outside into the cold, the air hit my lungs like a slap. The party noise was muted behind the tall windows, but inside my mind, everything was deafening. Ryan's voice, Vera's face, the word allowance echoing over and over again like a cruel joke. I didn't cry. Not yet. I didn't even sit down on the stone bench by their driveway, though my back and feet screamed for rest. Instead, I stood there in the shadows, arms crossed over my cheap wool coat, and let the past come roaring back like it always did when I was in pain. I'd been 29 when Ryan was born, and 32 when I buried his father. Stephen had been my high school sweetheart. He died of a sudden brain aneurysm on a Thursday morning, collapsing at the auto shop he'd just bought a year before. We were still paying off the loan. There was no warning, no time to prepare. Just a phone call and a rush to the hospital where a doctor told me the kindest thing was to let him go. Ryan was 3. He didn't understand why Daddy wasn't picking him up anymore. I told him he'd gone to heaven, but for months he would sit by the door in his footy pajamas, watching, waiting, until I scooped him up and carried him to bed. Those first few months, I didn't sleep. I'd get up at 4 a.m. to clean offices in the industrial district, then go straight to my day job at the deli. On weekends, I watched other people's children so I could afford Ryan's clothes, his food, the rent, and still buy a can of coffee that would last us 2 weeks. I didn't have help. My parents were both gone, and Stephen's mother had never liked me, said I was too plain, too poor, too ambitious, as if ambition was something a young widow had the luxury to indulge in. I remember one winter where the heating bill came in higher than expected. I had $30 in my account and a choice to make heat or groceries. Ryan had a cold that week, so I chose heat. I opened a can of expired soup for dinner and told him it was a special recipe from Grandma. He ate it with wide eyes and thanked me for being such a good cook. That was the night I cried in the bathroom while he slept. People talk about maternal strength like it's some kind of magic. It's not. It's survival. It's selling your wedding ring to fix the car because if you miss another shift, you'll get fired. It's borrowing the neighbor's iron so your son's school shirt doesn't look like it was fished from a pile of laundry. It's eating toast with margarine so your child can have the last cup of milk. When Ryan was 8, he got picked for the city's Little League team. The registration fee was $40. I had 12. So I cleaned out the spare room, sold my grandmother's rocking chair, and baked banana bread to sell at the church fundraiser. I remember standing in line at the rec center with that crumpled 40 in my hand, praying they wouldn't raise the fee last minute. They didn't. Ryan made the team and never knew the price of his uniform. By the time he reached middle school, I was working the night shift at a hotel changing sheets, scrubbing bathrooms, restocking minibars, while still doing lunch shifts at the diner. I'd sleep from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m., pack his lunch, send him to school, then nap again until noon before heading out. I lived in a cycle of exhaustion for years, but I never let Ryan feel it. I showed up to every school concert, even if I had to wear my uniform. I cheered at his games, even when I could barely keep my eyes open. I volunteered for field trips, baked for bake sales, and bought the $9 book for the reading contest, even when I should have spent it on laundry detergent. When he needed braces, I picked up extra hotel shifts, even on Sundays. When his computer broke during his senior year, I pawned the earrings Stephen gave me on our 10th anniversary. They were the only nice jewelry I owned. I didn't tell Ryan. I just smiled and said it was time for a new computer anyway. The day he got his college acceptance letter, he ran into the house, waving it like a golden ticket, full of excitement, full of dreams. He'd gotten a partial scholarship to a top university. I hugged him so tight he laughed and said, "Mom, you're squeezing the life out of me." He never saw the panic behind my smile. Even with the scholarship, tuition and expenses were over $20,000 a year. So I refinanced the house. I took out a loan with a criminal interest rate, and I told myself it was fine. It was all going to be worth it. I remember the moment he left for college, standing by the car with his new suitcase, a secondhand laptop, and more confidence than I'd ever seen in him. I kissed his cheek and said, "Make it count." He did. He graduated with honors, got a tech job straight out of school, and within a few years, he was making more money in a month than I made in a year. And through it all, I never asked for anything. Not because I was too proud, but because I genuinely believed he remembered. I thought he knew what I'd done to get him there, that he'd call, that he'd ask how I was managing, that he'd offer help because he wanted to, not because I begged. But he didn't call, not for birthdays, not for Christmas, not even when I was hospitalized with a chest infection 3 winters ago. I told myself he was busy. He had a wife, a career. I was just the mother who raised him. Maybe that was enough. Standing in the driveway outside his mansion, the memory of those sacrifices didn't make me feel noble. They made me feel used. I'd built a life for my son out of sweat, debt, and silence. And someone had taken all of that love, all that work, and turned it into a tool to steal from me. Ryan flourished in college. He found his people, tech lovers, entrepreneurs, kids who dreamed in code and talked about IPOs like other students talked about concerts. He'd call now and then, rambling excitedly about professors, projects, ideas for apps and platforms I didn't fully understand. I'd nod on the phone, smiling as I stood barefoot on the cold linoleum of our kitchen, holding a bill in one hand and a dishcloth in the other. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I'd say, even when I was too tired to make sense of his words. "You sound happy." And he was. He truly was. But with each semester, the distance between us grew subtle at first. Fewer phone calls, less interest in how I was doing. Then, one Thanksgiving, he didn't come home. "Too many midterms," he said. I roasted a chicken instead of a turkey and told myself it was fine. Then came Vera. The first time I met her was graduation weekend. I remember seeing her step out of the car like she was stepping out of a magazine. Tall, blonde, impeccably dressed. Vera had the look of someone who had never waited for anything. Not at a bus stop, not in a food pantry line, not even at a checkout counter. She smiled at me like a flight attendant, warm, polished, and vaguely superior. "This must be your mother," she said, her hand extended like a queen greeting a subject. "Ryan talks about you all the time." That was a lie. A smooth one. Too smooth. Still, I smiled and offered her the casserole dish I'd brought for the graduation potluck, a cheesy potato bake he used to beg me for when he was sick. She didn't take it. "Oh, we catered," she said brightly. "But that looks nice." Ryan was distracted the whole weekend. Checking his phone, talking with his startup friends, whispering with Vera. I sat on the sidelines, watching my son walk through his own celebration like I was just another guest. He thanked me for coming, hugged me lightly at the airport, and promised to call soon. He didn't. Over the next year, Ryan moved across the country with Vera for his job. They settled in Geneva, where her family was from, and he sent me a photo of their new apartment, sun-drenched, modern, a view of the lake. There was no note, just the image. I printed it out and taped it to my fridge anyway. Phone calls became scarce. Vera would answer sometimes, her tone always polite, always cool. "Ryan's in a meeting. He's on a work trip. He's got a conference call in 5. She never asked how I was doing. Not once. Eventually, Ryan just stopped calling altogether. I left voicemails. Sometimes I'd text a photo of a rose blooming in my garden, a picture of our old dog before she passed, a funny sign I saw in the neighborhood. He rarely replied. When he did, it was short and sweet. Thanks, Mom. Looks great. Hope you're doing well. I told myself this was normal. Suns drift, lives get busy. He was building his future. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. It was Vera. She didn't need to insult me directly, she did it in 1,000 smaller ways. The way she eyed my clothes during visits, like she was calculating the thread count. The way she talked about their wine subscription or ski weekends, as if I were part of a different species. She never made room for me, not in their home, not in their conversations, not in Ryan's new life. Once, I offered to fly out and visit. She said they'd be in the middle of a very hectic quarter, and that it would be more convenient if they came to me later in the year. They never did. Christmas gifts came by courier. A cashmere scarf I'd never wear, a kitchen gadget I didn't know how to use. One year, they sent me a smart speaker. I couldn't even figure out how to plug it in. I cried for an hour and left it in the box. Still, I held on to hope. I told myself Ryan would remember, that someday he'd show up at my door with a suitcase and say, "I'm sorry, Mom. I've been selfish. I miss you." That moment never came. 3 winters ago, I got pneumonia. I was in the hospital for 4 days. I didn't tell Ryan. I wanted to, but I was embarrassed. Not because I was sick, but because I knew he wouldn't come. Instead, I lay in that stiff hospital bed, hooked to machines, staring at the water-stained ceiling tiles and thinking about how many nights I'd stayed up nursing his fevers, rocking him through night terrors, warming soup when he was too weak to lift a spoon. And now, when I needed a phone call, a voice, just a voice, I had nothing. I came home alone to a house that needed a new roof and a refrigerator that rattled like an old man trying to breathe. I wrapped myself in blankets and got back to work as soon as I could because nobody else was going to keep the lights on. So when Ryan stood there on New Year's Eve, wine drunk and smug, asking if I was enjoying the allowance I'd never received, when Vera's eyes went wide and the air turned sharp with tension, it wasn't just about the money. It was about being erased. 3 days after the party, Ryan showed up at my front door. He looked like he hadn't slept. His tie was gone, his shirt wrinkled, and his winter coat hung open despite the bitter wind. He held a thick manila folder under one arm and stared at me like a man walking into a courtroom. "I need to show you something," he said. I stepped aside and let him in. He barely noticed the chipped paint on the doorframe or the cold air leaking in through the window by the couch. He used to ask if I needed help fixing those things. Now, he just sat on my thrift store love seat like a stranger who didn't know where to put his guilt. He spread the papers out on my coffee table, bank statements, transfer records, account summaries, all with my name, except it wasn't my account. "It's in your name," he said quietly. Full name, Dorothea Marion Foster. But the mailing address? I checked. It's a box rental at a private mailbox place near the city center. Not your street, not your building. I squinted at the numbers, the tiny text. It looked real. So official. My name in bold at the top. But everything else was wrong. "I've never seen this account before," I whispered. Ryan nodded. "Vera set it up. She told me it would be easier to manage your money this way, that you didn't want to deal with online banking or direct deposits, that she'd make sure everything was handled, that you'd be comfortable." That word again, comfortable. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt that way. Ryan leaned forward and pointed at the withdrawal patterns. The money went in every month, 7,000, right on the first. But it never sat in the account for long. Look at these withdrawals. Spa chains, designer stores, travel bookings, upscale restaurants. I stared at the numbers, but they blurred together. My name, her lifestyle. "She used your name to take the money I was sending you," he said, "for 3 years. My throat closed. I could barely form the question. "And you believed I was getting it all this time?" He nodded slowly, shame flooding his face. "I thought you were just being distant, that you were fine. I even felt guilty for not visiting more. But I thought, at the very least, I was helping." I turned away, gripping the side of the couch. While I worked 14-hour days, she got massages. While I ate oatmeal for dinner, she drank imported wine. While I limped through snow-covered streets to the cleaning job, she took weekend trips to French vineyards. Why? I asked, not even sure who I was asking. Why would she do this? Ryan swallowed. I think she wanted you gone. Not gone, but out of the way, out of my head, out of our lives. I shook my head slowly. She didn't just want me gone, Ryan. She wanted to erase me. He handed me one last paper, an email, printed from his home office. It was from Vera, to a friend, full of laughing emojis and smug little jabs. She thinks I'm doing her a favor. Meanwhile, I get a shopping spree every month, and Ryan gets to believe he's a good son. Win-win. I read it twice. Then I read it again. Something in me cracked, but it wasn't grief. It wasn't even rage. It was steel. I want the account closed, I said. Immediately? Done, he said. And I want every document, every email, every receipt. He nodded. I'll get them all, I promise. We sat there in silence for a moment, surrounded by proof, not just of theft, but of betrayal, of manipulation, of 3 years stolen from both of us. Finally, Ryan asked the question I hadn't dared let myself imagine yet. What do you want me to do, Mom? I looked at him, not the little boy I'd raised, but the man he'd become. A man who'd let others decide what he saw, what he believed, who he loved. And I realized something. I don't know yet, I said honestly, but when I do, I won't ask. I'd spent my life asking nicely. Those days were over. I sat alone for a long time after Ryan left. The documents were still spread out across my coffee table, but I wasn't looking at them anymore. I was looking at the clock on the wall, ticking softly, steadily. Same clock I'd bought from the church rummage sale 15 years ago. Its second hand had started sticking a few months back, pausing slightly every few beats before jumping forward again. That's what time felt like now. Sticky, jagged, off. I kept going back over it all. Not just the money, but the moments. The absence. The silence. For 3 years, Ryan hadn't called on my birthday. Not once. For 3 years, I spent Christmas Eve alone, watching old holiday movies with a single string of lights wrapped around my curtain rod. I would bake a small batch of cookies and eat them with tea, pretending it didn't matter. For 3 years, I convinced myself I was imagining things, that Ryan had simply grown busy, that he loved me in his own quiet way, that I was being too sensitive, but it hadn't been distance. It had been design. Vera had stolen more than money. She'd stolen the right to be cared about. She had taken my son's concern, his natural tender instinct to look after his mother, and rerouted it like a stream diverted from dry soil. She'd kept him feeling generous. She'd kept me feeling forgotten. That was the true crime, not just the theft, but the way she turned us into ghosts in each other's lives. When I struggled to climb the stairs after a long day, there should have been someone who noticed. When I skipped meals to pay the heating bill, there should have been someone who asked. When I cried myself to sleep on nights, the cold was too sharp and the loneliness too heavy, I should have known I wasn't actually alone. But instead, I had silence. Manufactured, purposeful silence. The kind that doesn't just hurt, it erases you. I picked up one of the emails Ryan had left behind. This one wasn't mocking. It was strategic. Vera had written to her financial advisor about maintaining plausible deniability in case Dorothea ever questioned anything. As if I were a problem to manage. A line item on a spreadsheet, not a human being. I'd spent a lifetime working so my son could have choices, and someone else had decided I didn't deserve even the truth. That's what I couldn't forgive. Not just that Vera had stolen from me, but that Ryan had let himself be convinced it didn't matter. That sending money absolved him. That love could be outsourced. I remembered something from years ago. Ryan had broken his wrist skateboarding. I'd been working 2 jobs at the time and had just gotten off a double shift. The emergency room nurse told me to sit down, that they had it under control. I refused. I stood next to that little hospital bed for 6 hours straight, holding his good hand, brushing his hair from his sweaty forehead, whispering that it was going to be okay, because I didn't want to be the kind of parent who showed up late to pain. And yet, here we were. Ryan had sent $7,000 a month and never noticed I was working myself to the bone. He'd bought silence, comfort, convenience, and Vera had pocketed every bit of it. I closed the folder and stood up. The pain in my knees made me wince, but I stood anyway. The years were gone, the money too, but I still had one thing left: my voice, and Vera was about to hear it. It was Ryan who called the next morning. His voice was clipped and tight, like it had been cinched around something that wouldn't stay down. "She's gone," he said. Vera packed a bag and went to her sister's in Montreux. I didn't ask if he'd told her to leave or if she'd simply chosen to vanish before the consequences caught up. It didn't matter. I wasn't after a confrontation. I was after clarity. "I've scheduled a meeting," he added after a pause. "I want you there. There's someone I want you to meet." That someone turned out to be a woman named Claudia, a forensic accountant with tired eyes and a neat brown bob. We met in her office 2 days later, surrounded by spreadsheets, manila folders, and legal pads lined with tiny, perfect handwriting. "I've reviewed everything Ryan gave me," Claudia said, her voice calm and cool. But I didn't stop there. She slid a folder across the table. I opened it, and the weight of it made my stomach turn. "Vera didn't just redirect Ryan's monthly transfers," Claudia said. "She created a network of deception, fabricated medical emergencies, falsified repair invoices, and submitted expense reports for things that never happened." I blinked at the papers: bills for surgeries I'd never had, home repairs I'd never authorized, and even a towing service charge for a car I hadn't driven in years. "She told me your roof caved in during a snowstorm last winter," Ryan said, still not looking at me. "Said you were living with space heaters and buckets. I sent $20,000 for emergency repairs." I stared at him. "Ryan, I've lived in the same duplex for 12 years. The roof leaks, but it hasn't caved in." Claudia nodded. "She created an entire narrative around you, one where you were constantly in crisis, too proud to admit it, and entirely dependent on her to manage the burden discreetly." Ryan looked sick. "She told me not to visit," he murmured. "Said you were embarrassed, that you didn't want me to see you like that." My throat closed. Not because of the lie, but because he'd believed it. Over and over again. Claudia flipped to a new page. "There's more. Vera also opened a second account in your name, this one tied to a line of credit. She borrowed against it and made payments just high enough to avoid detection." "What does that mean?" I asked, though I already felt the cold pressure behind my eyes. "It means your name is on a loan for 25,000 francs, Claudia said. "One you never applied for. We've started the fraud process. But it won't be easy. The documents are sophisticated. She forged signatures, manufactured addresses, even created fake correspondence from you approving the transactions." Ryan buried his face in his hands. "I was living with a con artist." Claudia gave a sympathetic nod. "And a very patient one. This took years of planning. She didn't just want to siphon money, she wanted full control of the narrative." I sat back in the chair, numb. 25,000 in fake debt, over $250,000 in stolen transfers. 3 years of my son's belief, twisted and manipulated. "Was there anything good?" I asked quietly. "Any part of her that might have—" "No," Ryan interrupted, looking at me with raw eyes. "Mom, I've read the emails, dozens of them. She bragged about it, mocked you, called you a dead weight in pearls, said I was gullible and that she deserved the money more than you because she knew how to use it." Claudia opened one last folder. "This is what finally made Ryan hire me," she said. Inside were printouts of messages between Vera and her attorney, discussions about long-term estate planning. My estate. "She was researching inheritance laws," Claudia said, "trying to determine what she'd be entitled to if Ryan predeceased you or if you passed away unexpectedly." "She was waiting for me to die," I whispered. "She was preparing to benefit from it," Claudia said gently. "She even made inquiries about assisted care facilities on your behalf, under your name, institutions you had never contacted." My jaw clenched. "So if Ryan had asked?" "She would have had a packet ready. Recommendations, warnings about your health, claims that she was acting in your best interest." Ryan stood abruptly and paced the length of the office. "I let her do this," he muttered. I handed her the keys and walked away. No, I said. You trusted your wife. No, he shook his head. I trusted convenience. I let distance replace connection. I told myself I was helping when really, I just didn't want to deal with the truth. We were quiet after that. The only sound was the soft ticking of Claudia's desk clock. Finally, she said, we have a few options. Civil charges, criminal fraud, identity theft. We can go after the money, freeze the assets. You can choose how far to take this. But I wasn't thinking about lawsuits. I was thinking about the picture Ryan had sent me of their lakefront apartment, the one I'd printed and taped to my fridge, and how many of those rooms had been decorated with money that had my name on it. She stole my son, I said softly. She took my place in his world and used it like a wallet. Ryan turned to me, tears brimming. I'm so sorry. I stood up and walked to the window, staring at the frozen lake outside. I don't know yet what I want to do, I said. But I know one thing. What? I want it to stop being quiet. I want the world to know exactly what she is. Ryan swallowed hard. Then, let's make some noise. A week later, Claudia called me at home. There's something else, she said. Her voice was tight, careful. I wasn't going to bring it up until we had more documentation, but I think you need to see this now. We met at her office again, though this time Ryan was already there, pale, pacing, gripping a coffee cup like it was anchoring him to the earth. Claudia didn't waste time. Have you ever heard of Ashcroft Hollow? She asked. I blinked. The land? Yes. It was my husband's grandfather's place up in the hills. A few acres, a cabin that fell apart years ago. Robert inherited it before he passed, but we never did anything with it. It was too remote, and I couldn't afford the taxes after he died. I assumed the county took it back years ago. Claudia opened a folder. That's what I thought too. But the property was never repossessed. The taxes were paid. Every year. On time. Quietly. My stomach dropped. Who paid them? I asked. Claudia didn't speak. She turned the folder around and slid it across the table. The checks were written from Vera's account. She's been paying the property taxes for the last 3 years, Claudia said. And that's not all. She hired a local surveyor to assess the land, commissioned a private environmental study, cleared brush, repaired the access road, all under her name. But why? Ryan sat down heavily. Because the state is planning a new highway project, a major expansion. They've been buying up land all around that area. Eminent domain. I stared at them. You're telling me that land is valuable? Claudia nodded. Very. The route is still being finalized, but based on current maps and the preliminary engineering documents, Ashcroft Hollow sits directly in the path of the proposed development. If approved, the government would be required to buy it at fair market value, likely well over £1 million francs. The room tilted. $1 million. For a patch of woods I hadn't seen in 30 years. Land I thought I'd lost. Land that should have gone to Ryan or to me. She was planning to steal it, I whispered. Yes, Claudia said. She was positioning herself as the caretaker, documenting her involvement, paying taxes, creating a false narrative that she had a claim. Ryan rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands. She told me it had been sold off years ago. I didn't even know you still had it. I didn't know, I said. I truly didn't. Claudia laid out more papers, photographs of the land, copies of receipts for fuel, tools, maintenance services. All traced back to Vera. She'd hired a local handyman to maintain the site and listed herself as the owner in correspondence. She was creating a paper trail, Claudia said, long-term, steady, believable. If you had died, she could have filed for adverse possession or claimed caretaker status for inheritance, especially since your name hadn't been on any recent utility records or documents. I sat back in my chair, stunned. She planned this, I said, years in advance. Not just the money, the property. My husband's legacy. She didn't want your comfort, Ryan said quietly. She wanted your worth. The betrayal was so layered, it didn't even feel real. She hadn't just siphoned money. She'd mapped out my death, waited for it like a business plan. Claudia reached into one last folder. We also found inquiries in Vera's email, she said. She was contacting real estate agents, preparing to sell the property as soon as it transferred legally to her name. She'd even started a shell company, Ashcroft Equity Partners. The plan was to run the money through that, keeping Ryan's name off everything. Ryan stood up again, pacing faster now. His hands trembled. I brought her into my life, he said. I married someone who saw my mother as an opportunity, who looked at everything you built and saw a ledger to exploit. I didn't speak. I couldn't. The lump in my throat was too big, but Claudia did. You're still the legal owner, she said. Your name is on the title. And now that we know what she's done, we can act. File a property claim immediately. Make your ownership ironclad. But we have to move fast before she tries to file her own claim or transfer the tax records. I nodded. Do it. We'll need a sworn statement, Claudia added, documenting the history, your husband's inheritance, your understanding of the land, your financial limitations after his death. I nodded again. I'll give you anything you need. She slid a blank legal form across the table. I picked up the pen and signed it with a firm hand. Ryan was still pacing. I should have asked more questions, he said. I should have noticed. Mom, Stop. I stood. He froze. This wasn't your doing. It was your blindness, maybe. Your willingness to believe the easy version of me that she fed you. But the crime was hers. The plan was hers. And now we take it back. His face crumpled, and for a second, I saw the boy he'd once been the child who used to press his head to my chest and say, "Promise me you won't ever leave." Now it was I who had nearly been lost. Not to death, but to erasure. And I was done letting it happen. We left Claudia's office with the legal wheels in motion. By that evening, the title documents were being reviewed. Notices had been filed. Vera wouldn't be able to touch the land without triggering alerts. Her scheme was unraveling fast. That night, I didn't sleep. But I didn't lie awake in grief either. I lay there thinking of Ashcroft Hollow, the trees, the creek, the cabin that was long gone. I remembered Robert showing Ryan how to build a fire there one fall. I remembered picking blueberries along the ridge, laughing when the dog got her paw stuck in a rabbit hole. I thought I'd lost that place, but I hadn't. And now? Now it would save me? The meeting took place exactly 1 week after Claudia filed the land protection documents. Vera requested it herself. She wants to explain, Ryan said, his voice flat. She asked to meet at the house. Of course she did, I said. She wants the marble and the mirrors behind her. We met instead at Claudia's office. Neutral ground. No crystal chandeliers, no catered distractions. Just a glass conference table, stacks of evidence, and the thick, sterile quiet of legal air. Vera arrived wearing a cream coat belted too tightly around her waist. Her hair, once flawless, was now limp around her face. Her makeup couldn't hide the puffiness under her eyes or the tremble in her jaw. She didn't look like someone who had been caught. She looked like someone who had been cornered. Ryan sat between us. Claudia sat opposite, her lawyer next to her. A recorder blinked red on the table, already rolling. I'd like to start, Vera said, her voice steady, rehearsed. Dorothea, I want to say I never meant for things to get so distorted. I said nothing. I truly believed I was helping, she went on. You've always been so independent, so private. I thought, if I could just manage things quietly, it would spare you embarrassment. Is that what the spa trips were for? I asked coolly. My dignity? Her eyes flicked to Ryan, searching for sympathy. Finding none. I did use some of the money, she admitted, but Ryan and I always talked about joint finances. I thought, no, I interrupted. You didn't think, you planned. Claudia slid a folder across the table. You filed over 30 financial transfers under Dorothea's name, falsified at least 4 emergency claims, initiated a shell company using a property you don't own. We have email correspondence confirming your intent to deceive. Vera flinched. I was trying to protect our future, she said to Ryan. That property would have ended up with us eventually. I just sped things up. No, Ryan said, his voice quiet but sharp. You stole it. You stole from my mother, and you stole from me. And the worst part? You made me believe she didn't want me in her life. Tears welled in Vera's eyes, but I didn't buy them. Not anymore. She was crying for the plan that fell apart, not the pain she caused. I loved you, she whispered to him. Everything I did was to build something for us. Ryan leaned back, arms crossed. You don't build a future on lies. Then I spoke. For 3 years, I said, keeping my voice steady. I thought my son had abandoned me. I thought I was alone. I ate frozen vegetables for dinner while you bought handbags. I worked double shifts with swollen knees while you flew to Paris for weekend getaways. I pawned my wedding ring to fix a radiator while you redecorated your guest bathroom. Vera opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. I'm not finished. She sank back in her chair. You didn't just take money, I continued. You took my son's concern. You redirected his love into silence. You left me sitting in an empty house year after year, wondering what I'd done to deserve being forgotten. I never meant for that, she said, but it was feeble now. Hollow. You wrote emails, I said, mocking me, calling me dead weight, telling your friends I was tougher than I looked so I didn't need the money, and all the while you were spending it. The room pulsed with quiet. Are you pressing charges? Vera asked after a long silence. Her voice was thin. I looked at Claudia, then back at Vera. No. Surprise flashed in her eyes. You're not? I'm not interested in dragging this through court, I said. Not because you deserve mercy, but because you're not worth the time. As you can tenture. Ryan glanced at me confused. You'll get no more money, I said. From him or from me. The land is secured in my name. The fraudulent accounts are closed. And you, Vera, are going to walk away from all of it. Her lips parted, disbelief spreading across her face. You're just letting me go? No, I said. I'm setting you free. There's a difference. She blinked. You can take your cream coat and your perfect lies and walk out of this building without handcuffs. But make no mistake, your life, as you built it, is over. Claudia nodded. We've already notified the relevant institutions. You'll be flagged on future property filings. Your financial reputation is compromised, and we've quietly passed documentation to Ryan's divorce attorney. At that, Vera finally broke. No, she whispered. Ryan, please. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. You know I'm not all bad. We had good years. You said we were a team. Ryan's voice was quiet, measured. We were never a team. You used me. You used my guilt about my mother. You fed me a version of her that kept you safe. And I let you. She reached for his hand. He didn't move. I want you to leave, he said. Now? Now. Vera looked around the room like someone searching for an exit in a house that had no doors. She stood slowly, hesitated, then gathered her purse. When she walked out, the silence left behind was strange, clean. Ryan turned to me. Mom, he said, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to fix this. No, I said, you'll spend it choosing better. That's all I want from you. He nodded. Later that afternoon, we filed the final papers on Ashcroft Hollow. The title was officially transferred into a protected trust with me as the sole beneficiary. Claudia had even started early talks with the State Development Agency. The compensation range, between 1.6 and 1.8 million francs. I stared at the number on the estimate form and felt nothing. Not yet. It wasn't about the money. It was about being visible again, real again, no longer just a name on a forged document. That night, I sat in my tiny living room with a mug of tea, watching the quiet snowfall outside my window. For the first time in years, I didn't feel tired. I felt ready. 18 months later, I woke to birdsong. Not traffic, not a neighbor's shouting child, not the rattle of pipes or the hum of an old heater clinging to life. Just birdsong and the soft rustle of mountain air drifting through the window of my new home. The house sits on a hill just outside Lucerne, overlooking the lake. It's not enormous, but every inch of it feels earned. There's a porch that wraps around the front, and in the mornings, I sit with my coffee and watch the mist curl over the water, as if the earth itself is still stretching into the day. The sale of Ashcroft Hollow closed for 1.7 million francs, just as Claudia had predicted. After taxes, fees, and paying off that fraudulent loan Vera took out in my name, I still had more money than I'd ever dreamed of having. Enough to buy the house in cash, enough to retire, enough to finally exhale. And I did. I handed in my notice at the grocery store the same day the money hit my account, folded up my apron, shook my manager's hand, and walked out without a glance behind me. That job had kept me afloat, and for that I was grateful. But I was done scraping by. I also called the cleaning agency that night, told them I wouldn't be coming back. The woman on the phone said she understood that she'd miss me. I hung up and cried for joy, for grief, for everything in between. I spent the first month in Lucerne doing nothing, absolutely nothing. I slept when I wanted, ate when I was hungry, sat on the porch for hours just watching, geese on the water, wind through the trees, my own hands not shaking from exhaustion, not red from bleach, just resting in my lap, still and whole. Eventually, I picked up a paintbrush. I'd always wanted to paint. Not because I thought I'd be good at it, but because it seemed like the kind of thing women in movies did when they'd finally made it through the storm. So I set up a small easel by the front window and began. At first, it was embarrassing. Lumpy pears, muddy sunsets, a dog that looked more like a bear. But slowly, I got better. Not good, but better. And more importantly, I loved it. The stillness, the focus, the small thrill of color blooming on canvas. Sometimes I paint the property I never got to say goodbye to, Ashcroft Hollow. I paint it from memory. The slope of the hill, the curve of the creek, the crumbled outline of the old cabin where Robert once carved our initials into the doorframe. I hang those paintings in the hallway, little testaments to what was and what was almost taken from me. Ryan visits often now, not because he has to, not out of guilt, just because he wants to. It took time, after the confrontation with Vera, for us to find something like normal. He went through a brutal divorce. She fought for everything, money, property, even tried to claim a stake in my settlement through what she called emotional investment. Claudia shut that down with surgical precision. In the end, Vera walked away with very little. The house was sold, the accounts were divided, and her name became a quiet stain on the edge of polite society. She still lives in Switzerland, as far as I know. A small apartment, an admin job somewhere. I don't ask for updates. I don't need them. My revenge was never about destruction. It was about reclamation. Ryan met someone new, a nurse named Clara. She's thoughtful in ways Vera never was. She listens, she laughs. She asks me about my paintings, my neighbors, my arthritis. She brings me tea she swears will fix my joints, and I drink it even though it tastes like boiled leaves. Last spring, they invited me to dinner in Zurich. Clara cooked, Ryan cleaned. I sat at their table and felt, for the first time in decades, like a mother who wasn't an afterthought. We don't talk about Vera much. When we do, it's brief, a shared glance, a line or two. We talk more about the time Ryan broke his arm skating, and how I cried more than he did, about Robert's laugh, about the field trips Ryan went on that he never knew I pawned jewelry to pay for. Sometimes, he cries, quietly. He says he wishes he'd known sooner, and I tell him the truth. Maybe it's good you were building a life. The mistake wasn't trusting her. The mistake was forgetting where you came from. He always nods at that. I still live alone, and I love it. The silence isn't empty anymore, it's peaceful. Mine. I read books. I tend a small garden. I go into town twice a week for groceries and walk the long way home just to feel the gravel under my shoes. I even joined a watercolor group that meets at the community center on Sundays. Most of us are over 60. Most of us have lived long enough to know what we don't need anymore. Noise, drama, pretending. We sit in a circle, brushes in hand, and paint whatever comes to mind. Last week, I painted my old duplex. Peeling paint, sagging steps, and a rose bush I'd kept alive for 10 years with nothing but dishwater and stubborn hope. It was the best thing I've painted yet. One morning, Ryan called just as I was pouring my coffee. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Always." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I've been thinking about writing a letter to Dad. I know it sounds silly. It doesn't. I want to tell him I'm sorry, and that I'm finally taking care of you, the way he would have wanted." I smiled. "He'd be proud of you," I said, "not because of the money, but because you came back, and because you stayed." We said goodbye, and I sat on the porch as the sun came up, warming the edges of the lake. So much had been taken from me, but even more had been given back. Peace, rest, the quiet joy of being remembered, and the strength of knowing I'd never forget myself again. Now I'm curious about you. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever gone through something like this? Let me know in the comments. And while you're here, I've left 2 of my other stories on screen. I promise they'll surprise you. Thanks for watching all the way to the end.